We are now talking about, as you can tell, obesity and the food system. And we have two amazing individuals to be part of this conversation and from whom we are going to learn a lot. So I want to ask Chris and then Sally, tell me about your organization, what it is, why you do what you do, and how you do it. Chris?
Yeah, so Dreaming Out Loud, you can probably tell by the name that we didn't start out working in food. We began teaching character and leadership development to children and youth in after-school and summer programs, and that's when we noticed a lot of issues. We had sugary snacks in the after-school programs as well as the summer programs, and we thought, what intervention can we make? And our first intervention was a farmer's market. When we got to know farmers, we got to begin to see the early stages of what.
And where was this?
In Washington, D.C. We're located here in the city. Our work primarily takes place in Ward 7. It's a community of 95% African Americans, about 75,000 people. Ward 8 has similar demographics. In those two areas, there's only 3 grocery stores for more than 160,000 people. This year, we had our first growing season at the Farm and Food Hub at Kelly Miller, located behind Kelly Miller Middle School, which has more than 400 students, and Lincoln Heights, which is one of the largest public housing communities in the city. So in our work, yes, it's about food and obesity, but it's also about using the food system as a community building and community economic development tool. We train folks in food enterprise, helping them to create businesses so that community ownership is a part of our solution. We help to provide food access as well as workforce development so folks can enter the food economy, being able to earn family supporting wages.
How did we get to a place in this country, whether it's Washington or any other city, where we have these food deserts that we now call them? What happened?
Well, yeah, to quote one of our, folks that we look up to, one of our elders, Karen Washington, she defines, she doesn't really use that term, she uses the term food apartheid. And we talk about that in that way because there's an intentional construction behind the systems that keep people from affording healthy food. Those are deeply connected to our historical roots in chattel slavery, the dispossession of land of black farmers, and economic devastation that leads to the racial wealth gap that we, in our work, help to address piece by piece, but that we also advance conversations about what it takes to close that gap. And that gap influences everything. The lack of resources in the community doesn't allow you to purchase healthy food. If you're starting a business in your own community, your customers are more limited in what they can purchase, and there's a cascading effect. But that cascading effect is rooted in our history.
And increasingly, we've gotten to a place where grocery stores, places that we normally would think we go to buy food, whether it's fresh vegetables or a farmer's market kind of location or a grocery store, are not investing. They're not present in these communities.
Yeah, that's correct. Grocery stores map their new stores based on the number of master's degrees and the levels of income. So when it comes to communities where they've been denied historically those advantages and those opportunities, they vacate, they leave. And so for us, the solutions are building the capacity and restoring ownership within communities so that those communities can take care of themselves, but being very real about what those barriers are.
So Sally Sampson, tell us about ChopChop, what it is.
So ChopChop is a quarterly magazine that is for kids 2 to 12 and their families. Our goal is to get kids to cook real food, and to cook and eat real food. And we're distributed in pediatricians' offices, schools, after schools, Wiccan SNAP programs, Indian reservations, basically wherever you find kids.
You're based in Boston.
Yes.
And how did you get started? Where did this come from?
I have a child with a chronic illness and spent a lot of time in hospitals having trouble with my deadlines as a food writer. And so I decided at some point...
A lot of us can...
Why is everybody laughing at that?
A lot of us can identify with this.
I mean, because she was in the hospital so much, but I ended up feeling like I didn't want to write cookbooks anymore. I wanted to do something more meaningful with my skills. And obesity was just really starting to get talked about all the time. So the original idea was to get pediatricians to basically prescribe cooking during well child visits.
And as you So you thought about it, but I mean, the idea of coming up with a magazine, of something that could be distributed all over the country, how did it?
It started in Boston with an enormous amount of support, and sort of everybody, mostly pediatricians that I talked to, sort of talked to more pediatricians, and everybody said, we need this because we're mandated to talk about healthy food or healthy eating, and we don't have any tools. So the American Academy of Pediatrics endorsed us and still do. And so it's in a ton of pediatricians' offices. It just spread very organically, really.
So who are you trying to reach with the magazine?
Everyone. Seriously.
Moms, dads, children.
Yeah.
In every part of the country.
Yes. We're very focused on low income, but high income people buy it, and low income people get it for free. So we're addressing everybody, and it's written to a 4th or 5th grade level.
So, Chris, let's come back to what you're doing. We're going to bring what you do together as we have this conversation. But how do you have this idea about what needs to be done. How do you get people to feel comfortable investing in these communities? Often people in the community themselves are reluctant to believe in their own community. How do you get them to do that?
I think it first starts with relationship building and trust building. Without that, you don't have the basis to sell your idea or anyone's idea of investing in the community. I think it takes listening. There are people who experience the circumstances firsthand have better understandings of what needs to be done. So those of us that have the privilege to access the resources and the relationships have to have an open ear to those solutions. I think those are some of the first things. Connecting to Sally's work. All of us who grew up in the Black community have these images of sitting on your grandmother's porch, breaking the snap peas and canning, getting back to some of our cultural and historical foodways. Those are the points of strength that we have to point to and utilize and leverage as we want to connect to our youth, as we want to connect to folks to begin to build out a new vision of what the food economy could be. And then those are also the points of building power and facing down and having tough conversations and speaking truth to power about what how those circumstances came to be. For us, we have those tough conversations. We talk about reparations. We have real conversations as we're building opportunities for entrepreneurs from our community that, small business loan is not going to fix 300 years of rapacious resource suction. Yeah. I couldn't put those words together quite as well as I would have imagined. But 300 years of lost wages and devastation of family wealth is not going to be fixed by the SBA.
So there's a will, there's a desire there in the community. How do you identify who it is you're going to focus on, and how do you get them working together to support what you want, where you want them to go?
You got to meet people where they're at. Not everyone's going to have going to take the same path to get to the same place. And some folks see different directions, but you got to kind of hold hands and walk along that path together. And sometimes it's a slower march, even though you want to get to the end point of this vision, but it takes some patience.
You work, what ages are we talking about? How do you tackle this?
Yeah, and
you work with children, but what are we talking about?
We're really lucky to be located behind the middle school, so there's 400 students between 6th and 8th grade. So we have a great resource there. That school is an asset. We work to build our farm and food hub into an asset where folks are reconnecting to those cultural foodways, where people are having the ability to access healthier food. But as we're building the food economy around the work that we do, we reach an older demographic through our workforce development and our food enterprise programs.
So let's try to bridge a little bit here. Sally, talk about the work that you do. It's obviously about cooking. It's about food, healthy food, combating obesity. But there's math, there's science in it. Talk about some of the real work that you do, the experiences you've had with kids, with families.
So we say that cooking cures everything. And we kind of mean it. You know, it's incredible for math skills. You think about, you take a recipe and you can talk about fractions, you can talk about doubling and all those kind of things. I had an experience with a board member, actually, who said that his kid was in 4th grade, was really having problems with division, felt really bad about himself because he couldn't do the math. And I said, give me an afternoon. And I went over and I just talked about apples. And you know, if you take an apple and you cut it up and you have your friends, and we sort of did that all day. Or all afternoon, and by the end of the day, he was literally giggling with, like, wow, I can do math. And so there's science, there's fermentation, there's, you know, there's financial literacy, there's cultural literacy. You know, we're cooking food from every culture. The kids all are from different cultures. So there's kind of nothing that doesn't get tackled by food.
Do the kids that you reach, whether if it's in a place like DC or Baltimore or Philadelphia, do they have access to apples, to, you know, to fresh fruit and vegetables? And how do you talk to them about that?
So some do, and those kids go home and they ask their parents to make things. But in some cases they don't, but they're still learning about apples. So we're not just giving a recipe for how to make applesauce. We're telling you about apples. We're giving taste tests for teachers to do in schools. So we also have curriculum to go with each issue. So even if you're not cooking, you're still learning about it, and that should be sticking with you. And at least that's the feedback that we get from educators.
Chris, how can other organizations that want to do the kind of thing that you're doing learn from you? What can they take from your experience, do you think?
Yeah, I think you can learn from our missteps as much as you can from what we've accomplished. If you haven't failed, you haven't tried. I think the solutions and the ideas are there within communities. For us, it's helping to advise and talk about how to access more resources, how to leverage networks, how to leverage community assets, and to first and foremost recognize and uplift the assets that exist within communities, whether that's the church or the school or resident councils. There are women on the ground who are leading in all of those spaces. For us, it's having those conversations about what those assets and who those leaders are, and supporting. You know, there's no model that is a cookie cutter that you can apply to every space. But
yeah, that's
some fundamentals there.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when you say assets and leverage, you're talking about people. You're talking about church.
Church, well, faith institutions.
Right.
You know, we have folks of many faiths in our communities, and I should recognize that. But those institutions are there. There are folks making efforts within those institutions. And sometimes it's just a matter of a little bit of technical assistance saying, or playing matchmaker, saying, I know a black farmer in West Virginia. You all have a food program. Here's a connection. Let's schedule a meetup. You know, we can chop up some kale and have a conversation. And that's
chop up some kale together.
Chop up.
Speaking of which, so Sally, what about you? I mean, what can other organizations learn from what you've learned, from what you do? I mean,
what we do is actually kind of unusual. So we're a magazine, but we're a nonprofit. So we don't really function like a magazine or like a nonprofit. We're not, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe a better question is, what do you want to happen in these communities where they're reading about what you've learned, what you do? What do you want to see happen there?
Well, I mean, I think like Chris, we're learning from our mistakes, where we really pay attention to feedback.
What's an example of a mistake?
Of a mistake. Oh, come on.
All right, let's move on. Sometimes people have a favorite mistake they want.
Really, though, we really listen. We're constantly changing the magazine. So if we're not I'm trying to think of a good example, and of course can't.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
But we are changing all the time with feedback.
And do you get feedback?
We get a lot of feedback.
And I mean, in what form? Do people email? Do they?
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. We get feedback a lot from teachers who are using it in the classroom. We get, go ahead.
Keep going.
We get feedback from pediatricians who are using it in their practices. We do a lot of custom versions for SNAP programs. So a lot of SNAP Ed is used they buy ChopChop and then they distribute it. So we get a lot of feedback from them. Every issue is read through by at least 4 SNAP administrators, somebody from the American Academy of Pediatrics, somebody who reads it for reading comprehension level. So we have a lot of eyes on every issue.
Yeah, a lot of editorial
Yes.
Oversight,
Yes.
which is always a good thing. So let's finally I want to hear from both of you. To you, what is success? What will you view as, you're already successful at what you do, but where do you want to be? Where do you want to take this, Chris?
Yeah, I think that we want to continue to play a role in connecting the movement that's on the ground that's centered around food and centered around resurrecting a vision of communities that highlights the best of the humanity that exists there. We want to play a role in a national conversation about what it looks like to have restorative justice and a restorative framework for communities that have been devastated by the criminal justice system, by economic deprivation, being underserved by our education system. What does it look like when we invest in the people and invest in communities as much as we invest in weapons and tax cuts and all the other things that we have time for, and we don't have time for our people? For me, that's what that looks like. I mean, it's challenging some of your board members, your congressperson, your senator, to have those tough conversations. We talk race, we talk class, we talk gender in our work.
Right.
For us, it's bringing those to the fore. And for those of us who do have the privilege to occupy spaces, it's letting the folks who have suffered those injustices the most lead the conversation and stepping back. So that's what it looks like for me.
And knowing even that when the national conversation isn't focused on the things that matter to you, you keep going.
Absolutely. Can't tire. My mom won't let me get tired. She's in the back over there.
If you didn't hear, he said can't tire.
Yeah.
Can't get tired.
Can't get tired.
Sally, what about you? What is success? I mean, you've already, accomplished so much. What is success?
Well, 2 things. One is we want to make cooking cool. Real cooking. I'm not talking about fancy cooking. And the other thing is cooking is not part of the conversation about obesity. Nobody talks about it. We say don't eat junk food. We say, all these different things.
Don't.
It's all don'ts. And we really see it as a solution. If you're cooking your own food, you know what you're eating, you're learning how to feed yourself, you're learning how to feed other people. It really needs to be part of the conversation.
And you need to have access to the food.
Correct.
To cook.
We need to work together.
Which, by the way, backstage, they've already said that they're going to start to do. So let's thank Sally and Chris for a great presentation.